Today, I am happy to welcome Leslie Holthoff. Leslie is an author. She's a divorce coach. She is a co-parenting coach.
Mhm.
And what she says about herself, which is pretty compelling, she survived teen pregnancy at 16, then a young marriage, another child, a divorce by 26 years old. And as a single parent, she worked to earn her degree in psychology. She continued on to get her master's degree and is now in the process of obtaining her Ph.D. So, what she's done is she's used her past experiences to help guide others through the divorce process and also to help people improve their co-parenting relationships. What's really cool as well is she also recently published a book called Not Mary, Not Row: The Survival Story of a Reluctant Teen Mom. Leslie, thank you for
Yeah.
joining me.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, really glad you joined me. And I'm going to be taking some notes as we're chatting because that's what I do. Now, divorce coach. So,
Mhm.
one of the things that I often have people ask me, well, how is a divorce coach different than a therapist?
Great question. A lot of people ask that. So here's the way that I look at it.
Mhm.
Usually when you go through divorce, I certainly suggest you have both. Your therapist will help you say, how did I get to where I am now?
Mhm.
How did I perhaps allow this relationship to happen? What was I missing that, whatever it is, it's more about the past. Whereas a divorce coach is here we are. Where do you want to be at the end of this divorce? And where do you want to be maybe 1 year, 2 years after that? So the divorce coach is about assessing where you are, but they do more than that. If I become involved with a client who, say, has just become separated,
Mhm.
I'll help you research lawyers, help you get your documents together, help you know what you need to take to the lawyer's office. Do you need a financial planner? Do we need to talk about your real estate? Research where you're going to live, or are you keeping the house? Like all these types of things. We also talk about what type of arrangement you want for your children, if that applies, what you would like to get, and then what it would look like. Say, for example, if you and your spouse are going for different things, we talk a lot about that. So we really assess where we're at, and we really try to put our best foot forward with lawyers and judges and court dates and mediation and that type of thing. And then we also try to set some goals on who we want to be by the time the divorce is over and
I
where
like how you say who we want to be, as
we want.
opposed to I want my divorce to end up a certain way. It's like who we are as a person after we're through that process.
Yes, because as you well know, divorce can get so ugly. And I think it's really important to say, who do you want to be when this divorce is over? Because we want to make decisions that you're proud of. It's important. And I am not a fan of the mudslinging and and that
No
kind of thing.
kidding.
And I really try to talk to my clients about that. What you say and do during your divorce can impact who you are at the end of it, right?
Yes. You know, it's true. I always think that families, don't belong in courtrooms. That's my total belief. And of course, the cost of litigation is enormous. It's just,
Astronomical.
like not only in terms of your wallet, but also why not keep your hard-earned resources instead of making your divorce lawyer rich? You know, and actually, and even, as someone who's practiced law for over 25 years, is that it's actually unpleasant for us too. In my world, it's unpleasant to be in litigation as opposed to, now what you're saying was guiding them to coming up with an agreement or finding lawyers and stuff. And you mentioned mediation as a way of
Mhm.
resolving matters. And if you were to think about, and what's so interesting when you're talking about divorce coaching, what I heard you say, like, it's almost like not really a rah you can do it type cheering on, but maybe there's some of that. Is there some of that too?
Yeah, there's some of that.
Yeah, I'll bet. Yeah. But also kind of being almost purposeful about your plan, purposeful, and being with somebody to kind of hold their hand and guide them through the process to creating this new life that maybe they don't see yet.
Yes. And I'm glad that you brought that up. And that actually ties back into another difference between a divorce therapist and, or at least my practice as a divorced coach versus a therapist. And that is when you see a therapist, you almost always, you have 1 hour of your therapist time once a week.
Yeah.
And my divorce coaching practice is set up where that is the given. So every week we plan on an hour. But when I always put it this way, when the shit hits the fan, call me. You know,
Right.
like when, for example, I've had clients who we have our call and everything's going great and we're making our plans for what we're going to do. And the very next day they're served papers where out of the blue, their spouse has now filed for full custody.
Right.
Do not wait to talk to me for 6 days. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I am there when that stuff happens to help try and calm my clients down and say, okay, why is he doing this? Do they have any real reason for this? Is this him just, or her, you know, just trying to exert power and just make this complicated? Is this coming from a place of anger or is this coming from a place of safety? You know, and to really walk through those things and remind my clients, this is an overwhelming emotional experience.
Yeah.
Sometimes even when you know that things are not logical or not likely, it still feels like your whole world is being completely transformed and being ripped out from underneath you. And those emotions are okay, but you got to keep them in check. You know, it's okay to feel that way sometimes and then make good communication and logical decisions moving forward based on who you want to be at the end.
Now tell me, now you mentioned the word custody. Now, where I live in British Columbia, Canada, our law has actually done away with the word custody, right? Lawyers call it the C word. And, you know, there's other C words that people don't like, but custody, because people would go like, they would say, first thing they would say is like, well, I want custody of the kids. And I said, well, do you know what that means? I get the kids, you know? So people would have these knock them down, drag them out about these fights, not even realizing what they were fighting about. So in my jurisdiction, we now have parenting time, guardianship, parenting responsibilities. So it's, and so what jurisdiction are you in, Leslie?
So I'm in Virginia.
Yeah.
So southeast on the East Coast. And we still use the word custody. You know, we really, the goal here locally is to try to come up with a parenting agreement and kind of go from there. And going to court is still the last, this is the way I tell my client, if you show up in front of a judge to fight over custody of your kids, you've already failed.
Right. Yeah.
You've already said the two of us as adults are unable to come up with a solution. You've probably already met with a mediator. You probably already had 2 lawyers in the middle of it. So as a last case, last ditch effort, you're in front of a judge. And the judge knows that, and they're not going to be very proud of you, and they're not going to have a whole lot of faith in what you're doing. So know that we try to avoid that at all costs.
Right. Now, I always think that, you know, wouldn't it be great if that was the assumption, if lawyers too, if there was this belief that, oh, you must have really failed your clients because you actually are darkening the door of a courtroom again, dragging your client and their families through the court systems. And of course, it's always the same lawyers, by the way, that are going to court all the time, you know, it's always the same ones. And they tend not to have dispute resolution training. They tend not to have mediation skills. Like it just, you know, goes on. And then sometimes I always say like using court as a last resort, because do you find sometimes, you know, the people you coach, I'd love to hear of an example of this, is there's that assumption where it always takes 2 to tango. And I always think, you know, sometimes it really doesn't. Sometimes one person is just a freaking nightmare, you know? And I had this one case, it was a custody case, you know, before the law changed. I had it for 11 years. And it was, the kid eventually grew up. And I also said, I can't do this anymore. I just can't. And in that particular case, you know, in the thousands of families I've represented, it's one of 3 parents who have actually not been able to see their children, right? Their kid, because they're so high conflict. Like they just could not resist putting the kid in the middle of, like creating conflict, creating huge drama and putting the kid right in the middle of it, right? And so do you find that sometimes you just have those high conflict people that they're coming to you and going, oh my God, my ex is so high conflict, they're a nightmare, they're trying to turn the kids against me, or whatever it is?
Yes. And sadly, one of the cases that was the hardest for me to deal with, the parents actually separated and they were co-parenting beautifully. I mean, like model co-parenting, until she actually moved on, started dating
gets a new boyfriend.
Because of the boyfriend. And then all of a sudden she's living with the boyfriend. They've decided to have another baby. And now my client has become the devil, right? Like all of everything about his personality, which she loved for 14, 15 years,
Yeah.
which she, wanted to see in her children. Suddenly it was like, he's the bad guy. And the poor guy, it's just a guy, right? He's just a dad trying to figure out how to raise kids. And
Yeah.
he's a great guy. And he didn't know, and it wasn't even like there was like a jealousy or, they had been split up for enough time that it wasn't even that initial rage and anger. He was just sort of like blindsided, like, I don't get it. Why was this okay 6 months ago? And now we can't even go to our child's sports event together and sit on the same anywhere near each other, right? Like it got that bad. And it really was, in this case, the mom who just made the decision that this person wasn't good enough anymore. And she was going to do everything she could to make the kids see that, which is really just the worst thing. Like they just really don't see what they're doing. And what I wish that I could say more is I wish I could sit down with the boyfriend, right? Mm-hmm. And say, your job and he's not even legally a step parent, right? But your job when you are involved in somebody else's kids like that, it's your job to be a catalyst for the relationship with their other parent.
Totally.
You are a better step parent by encouraging the relationship with their real dad, real mom, because you can't take that place. You can bring so much value to a child's life being a step parent, but you cannot take over and be this other person. You just can't.
It's so, it's so interesting because and I always tell my clients when they have that kind of a situation in their lives, right? I said, being a step parent is not for the faint of heart. I was a step parent, it was tough at times. Like, and, to two girls and, now one's in her early 30s and one's in her later 20s, right? And I'm super tight with them both. Well, he ultimately had 3 children, 3 different moms. So it was really blended, right? But, there was kind of like, I didn't have any decision-making power and it wasn't my place at all to have decision-making power. And I wouldn't have wanted that. But, sometimes, like I remember one time I'd overstepped with the oldest one. I said to her mom something because she was really struggling in school. And I said, have you had her assessed for ADHD or anything like that? And the mom just went, right? And so I realized I'd overstepped, because it wasn't really, anyway, like I could tell I'd overstepped by how upset she was by it. And of course the kid did later on get diagnosed, but anyway, but that was, I wasn't a parent, and I just got smacked down super hard about that. And I think I deserved it at the time, and yet, I see, unfortunately, sometimes, that wicked stepmother, that type thing that we, Disney shows, right? Well, that actually, not always, but it does exist.
It does. Both of my kids. So I'm, obviously divorced. I have 2 kids, 2 different dads, and they both have remarried. And so I've dealt with 2 very different women, and the relationships were, neither one of them is great, but one of them was significantly worse. My oldest son, his father remarried when he was maybe 7 or 8, and they're still married, and this been probably 20 years now, but it's still our relationship. At some point we said, we just can't talk. Like we are just oil and water. And so everything had to go between, and that's fine. Everything was just me and his dad, and we've been able to talk things through, and that has worked now for a very, very long time. But when she originally stepped in, she tried to really sort of take over the co-parenting and the scheduling, and it did not go well.
No, it really doesn't. And I'm curious to know what happened with that family you were talking about. What happens was this new partner comes in, they take over the communications, and you can totally tell too if it's an email, right? Like if it was let's say it's a woman and the guy was like kind of a 2-finger typer and he would do these little tiny emails. Yeah, good. And all of a sudden, he has a new girlfriend and they get this like big long missive, missile emails that last on and on, right? That he's not doing that. Like you just know for a fact, there's no way he would never spend the time doing that. Like I'm just thinking of some cases I've had. And so for your client, how did it turn out? Or is it still
for that particular client? She ended up trying to get full custody of the kids. And so I worked with him while they were in the court process. And thankfully they got guardian ad litems and the court saw through it. So they ended up not only maintaining the schedule they already had, he actually got like 1 more night because they weren't quite 50-50. And thank God for that. But I know we still talk and she still does things. She still tells the kids these things. Like for one thing, she'll pretend like the kids have the last name of the new boyfriend.
Yeah.
You can't do that. Like, what is the
Yeah.
point of that anyways? You're confusing your kid, you're hurting your ex. Nothing,
Yeah.
like, what good comes of that? Like, there's not even anything positive. So, she still does things and the kids are paying the price. And I hate that for them, because eventually I have to believe that the kids are going to get old enough to see that, and it's going to affect their relationship with her.
It's really interesting that you should say that, but then you wonder how much damage is done along the way. I have a video that I like to show my clients, and I'll put it in the show notes. It's called Brain Builders, and it shows like how it impacts kids when they are involved in conflict, right? Like what it does to their brain. Like the kind of is this like little cartoon where it shows a kid like kind of learning, going to school and trying to remember your lunch and like all the stuff that you have to, friends and peers and then hormones, and then you throw on like BS from the parents on top of it. Oh my gosh, the poor kids, right? Like, how can they even manage, Yeah, it's really, really tough. And, I just think of this one case relatively recently that I dealt with where the parents had been co parents and they did okay, odd bump, but whatever. Then by the time I become involved, it's been like toxic soup for 2 years. And I'm saying, well, oh, now I see my guy has this new partner, new wife. I said, "Oh, when did you guys get together?" "Oh, 2 years ago." Anyway, and so as the case unfolds, I realize that my guy was trying to appease his new wife, and they have two little kids in his new relationship, and then this 11-year-old going back and forth with the mom. And they used to do barbecues together, like just celebrate main events together, birthday parties, that kind of stuff. Well, then all of a sudden it goes from that to the mom can't even go to the house if the kids because the kid was week on week off. Oh, she forgot her soccer cleats, so he wouldn't allow her to come to the house to get the soccer cleats because it upset his wife too much. And so the things I always say to you, when there is that kind of dynamic, like as a step parent, and if it's a step parent issue, like in that particular case, I said to my client's wife, I said, when you signed up to be in a relationship with him, you have to realize that you don't get to be the child's mom. You don't get to, if that's not your role, right?
It's hard. And being the step parent is hard, but it's also hard in that new relationship. I mean, I know for me, I remarried 10 years ago. And so my husband, who didn't have any kids, so I was not a stepmom, but he walked in right as my older child was moving out. So he basically was around for a significant portion of my younger son life. And even me, it's like when my kid was in trouble for something, let's say, and I'm angry, and I know that his dad is going to be angry. But now you have this other person who is an incredible role model and wants to say or do the right thing. But also my son doesn't need three parents. I'm not even sure that he needed the discipline from two different houses, which is a whole nother conversation. But, it's really difficult on my end. And I would find that anytime it came to talking about anything negative that my child was doing or had done or that kind of thing, like I just clench up with anxiety, right? Because I'm like, I also, you don't want to, it's hard. That's all I'm saying. It's hard for everyone.
And the things it doesn't have to be, like, I mean, I mentioned that one bump in the road where I suggested my stepdaughter get assessed for ADHD, but mostly like we did really well, like we did do the Easter egg hunts together and certain family dinners and like all that kind of stuff, right? Because it was, that whole image of it takes a village to raise a child, and
Yes.
and my husband and I split up 2 times before, like the second time until it was final. But the first time we split up, the mom of the second child came to me and she said, "Val, whatever you do, please stay part of my daughter's lives," right? Because she had another child from a different relationship. And, and I was like, yes, of course. And if anything, when that first separation happened, it solidified my relationship with my middle stepdaughter, because just because her dad was gone, I continued my relationship with her because she was a teen at the time. And it was, it kind of really gelled things in a way that might not have happened. I wasn't just his dad's girlfriend or wife. I was actually, had an independent relationship with her. And so then I thought that was good for my daughter who was younger than her. Right. And so it kind of, bringing them all together and supporting that kind of interconnected, very unusual.
It is. I truly believe that it is. And that's, when I got divorced, my ex-husband remarried and him and this wife had these two kids. And I was so naive that I thought we were going to be the best co-parents in the world. So my son is like 13 years older than their kids. I mean, it was a big age gap. And I'm like, oh my God, but he can babysit at my house and you can drop your kids off and I'll be here to just keep an eye on things. And I just was really, really naive about a lot of things, but it did not end up like that. But it is just, it's really hard to know what those boundaries are and what works. And a lot of it, I think, all the kids are different.
Yeah,
You know,
totally.
like
Yeah.
some kids don't want that, some kids do. And I think a lot of that just depends on the relationship you had.
When you have a high, like I was thinking about this one case, going back to you were mentioning, you had this case where the mom would share a really damaging narrative with the children regarding your guy client. And I know that, this one case I had, the one that lasted for 11 years. The guy on that case got arrested just recently for criminal harassment. But the point, like, there was a court order that said absolute strict, like, you don't talk about the court case,
Yes.
you don't talk about the other parent, you don't talk about any psychological assessment. Like, such a strict order that he breached 6 ways from Sunday all the time. And my client's a very rules oriented person. And so she would never say anything. So then what ended up happening is the child's psychologist basically said to her, look, that child has one narrative only, right? And that narrative is, like, you've got to give him another narrative. He has to have another, like, I'm not saying trash his dad, but I'm saying you have to allow him to know that there's something different other than you being an evil bitch.
I mean, and
And
that
so,
is true, of course. And that is
yeah,
a hard line to walk too, right? Because at some point you do want to sit down with your kid, and depending on the age, and say, look, this is what's happening. Like, it's
yeah,
not your fault, but this is what we're looking at. And these are some things that we're struggling with. And one thing that I found is I tried really hard, not, I guess, maybe even too much, to not do that as much with my child when he was younger. But once they got older, legal adults and such, I've tried to have some of those conversations and still not bash, their
yeah,
dads, but say,
yeah,
hey, look, we were both young when we were married. We both made mistakes.
yeah,
Like, I didn't say I did this and he did that, but it was like, I said, you can't understand until you're married and or maybe even have kids, how difficult it is to be in a full-time, all the time relationship with somebody that it isn't working,
yeah,
and I was like, one day you'll understand that. But I was like, we're both young, and it's really helped, especially now that he's older and he can look back, because he hated 50-50 when we did it, but he said to me, I wish you guys were still married, but he didn't think we really should be married. He thought his life would be easier if he didn't have two houses. And of course it would, sort
yeah,
of, right? Because he doesn't know, I wouldn't have been the same kind of mom that I wanted to be, and the person that I am, because my whole personality got smashed and
yeah.
put in a box, and I had to spend all of my time cleaning up his messes, taking care of him. And I was so sad and I was so depressed. And my
Right.
whole personality was gone. And I'm like, and I said that to him, I'm like, you wouldn't even know who I am right now.
Well,
I don't
this
even
is,
know if I would have made it through it.
yeah, well, this is the thing too. Like, the people that say, they want to stay together for the sake of the children. I'm thinking, oh my gosh. So what are you teaching your kids?
If you like what you see here, hit that like button and hit the subscribe button so you will be kept apprised of every time I release a new video. And last but not least, if you want to leave a comment, be sure to do so, because I will always respond.
I read this piece somewhere that just shook me to your core, because kids learn how to live in relationships and families the way we teach them, based upon our experiences or how we're living. So the question becomes, would you want your kids to be living the life you're living right now? Because
Yes.
if you don't make this change, that's the life they're going to be living, right?
Mhm.
And
I
I
pose
thought,
that to my
oh,
clients.
ouch, right? And yeah, ouch. And so, I was thinking, if a child's, being raised in a toxic environment, what does that talk, respect between people, or people having, even in conflict, like, does it teach them about healthy conflict, or does it teach them about giving the person the cold shoulder for 4 days, or whatever the various issues are, and you're saying that you were not who you were, right? Like, you were not able to be your personality, right? And then what would that have taught your son about what kind of woman to be involved with, and how deep would his relationships be if he was, raised by a person who wasn't able to say who they are or be who they are, right? Be fully expressed.
Yes. And as he gets older, I'm sure those conversations will continue to come up. But I wrote about that in my book. It's like, I lost me. By the time I left my marriage, I didn't even remember what it felt like to be me, because
Yeah,
so much of me had become me changing to make the situation less bad.
yeah,
I almost didn't remember who I was. It took me a long time to find myself again, which is exactly the kind of stuff I try to talk to you about with my clients. When you're going through this divorce, you do get to pick who you get to be at the end of it, to some
yeah,
degree.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you get to decide how you handle it and what you're going to be able to look your kids in the face one day and say, yeah, it was hard, but I had to do it and I would do it again, which is still
Hmm.
true. And,
Hmm.
like you said, I want them to have healthy relationships. And I'm
Hmm.
happy that my kids have seen 10 years of me in a healthy relationship, right? It
Right.
hasn't
Yeah.
always been perfectly happy, but they've seen us have what you just called healthy conflict, and I never feel like I lose myself, like I'm in a relationship where I feel like I can have open conversations that involve me, because even that didn't happen in my marriage. It was always about him, so I hope that I've taught them that.
Yeah.
I can kind of already tell in the people they're dating that I did teach them that.
Yeah.
And they'll
That's great. Now,
figure it
can
out.
I
I mean, that's
can
the
I
other
go?
thing too.
What's
Kids
that?
survive in spite of you, not because of you.
Yeah, exactly. Now, that's true. And okay, I want to go back to this. Now, you said that you had your baby, you got pregnant at 16, and then did you get married right off the bat, or how did that
So
go?
I actually got pregnant at 15.
Yeah,
My son was born about 6 weeks after my 16th birthday.
yeah.
And I did not marry his father. We
Hmm.
tried to make it work off and on for years. I only dated basically two people in high school, and the first one I had a son with, and then we dated off and on. And then I was in love with the other one, and I ended up marrying the other one and having
Yeah.
another son, and then divorcing him.
How old are your boys? Like, how many years apart are they?
8. So
Okay.
I had
Yeah.
one at 16 and one at like 24-ish, 22,
Hmm.
I guess. And then I got divorced around 25. So now they are 28 and 20 and will be 29 and 21 this year.
Right. Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
wow.
And so okay, so you first boyfriend, you get pregnant, and then you have the
Mhm.
baby. That doesn't work, and you weren't in love with the first boyfriend so much.
Well, I mean, I loved him, but I don't know. I loved him. I still love him to some degree, right? But I knew he wasn't who I wanted to be with. And he had a
Right.
lot of, we all did back then, right? We were battling with depression and didn't really even have a name for it. And he had a lot of emotional issues, and I just wasn't very good at dealing with them. And
Hmm.
in the end, when we ended up being friends all these years later, I'm like, this is perfect. This is exactly where we were supposed to be.
Right.
But anyways, I dated them off and on before I
Yeah.
got pregnant, like all through for years. I was pretty much with one or the other at different stages in my life. And then even after we had my son at 16, we tried desperately hard to make it work. We were actually engaged at some point. I called off the wedding just
Yeah.
like 30
Yeah.
days before the wedding, something like that. And I just
Yeah.
said, all of a sudden I realized I was doing it because he was
Yeah.
my son's father, and that's what I was supposed to do. And thank God I figured that out before I walked down the aisle. Wish I'd have figured it out the second time before I walked down the aisle, but
And how old were you when you got married then?
22, I think.
Yeah.
20.
Yeah.
Yes, I was
And
22. And then my
yeah.
son came a little more than almost 2 years later. And then I got divorced about 2 years after that. So he
Right.
was 2 when I left.
And you're mentioning the thing about being a reluctant teen mom. Tell me about the reluctant part.
I did not want to have a baby.
Hmm.
It's funny. I was not, my whole situation is based on this one night. And when I told my best friend about it, she literally laughed in my face and she said, that doesn't count. You didn't have sex. And so I did not want to be pregnant. I didn't want to have sex. I didn't want to have a baby. But I came from, we were a church family, and I didn't know a whole lot about abortion, but I knew that it was all right at the time, thought it was very wrong. And so I didn't feel like I had any options. The only things I really considered was keeping him and adoption, which is something that I did talk to people about, and, just made my decision based on what I thought was right at the time. But I can tell you, a 15-year-old in that situation has absolutely no idea what they're doing.
Yeah.
I might as well have just thrown a piece of paper at the wall and seen what it landed closest to and called it, right? I mean, I had
Yeah.
just zero understanding of what it takes to be a parent,
Yeah.
and what it would do to the rest of my life. And it took me a really long time. I mean, the mental process that I had to go through to make it past this took me decades.
Yes. So you kept the baby. And what about family support? Like, how was that?
I have the most incredible parents ever. They were, heartbroken, obviously. They took it upon themselves I have a really big family on both sides. They took it upon themselves to tell everybody else in the family. So my family was supportive, which
Right. And it sounds like there was shame associated there
I'm
too.
not sure what the word is after shame, but yeah, I was so embarrassed of my situation, of who I was, of having a child, of putting my family in that position. I
And
mean,
when you say putting your family in that position, what do you mean, Leslie?
Well, I mean that they were, they were embarrassed that they had a child, having a child out of wedlock and being 15. So that was embarrassing. It was no, they'd never been in that situation before. All my family was married, and you waited till you were married to have sex, and it was embarrassing for everyone involved, basically, especially me. And so there was just a lot of, I don't know.
So yeah, so a lot of conflicting feelings. So it didn't occur to you that you could make a different decision other than keeping him or giving him up for adoption. And
Correct.
and then also you make a really hard choice. You have him, and then you also get to feel, end up feeling ashamed and bad and guilty about it as well.
I mean, those
Hence the
feelings never
reluctance.
went away. I still feel that way. So writing a book about it and talking about it publicly is a huge step. And I'd like to think it's part of my healing, but I'm still embarrassed about that, like I didn't want that. Who would want that? And I am proud that I think I made the best of a bad situation. And I'm proud that I've taken those experiences and I've hopefully turned them into something that will help others in that situation and help create a career that I'm really proud of, and that I can help people I can say, look, I did this the wrong way. Like I made a lot of choices that were wrong and bad, and I had nothing to guide me. I didn't grow up with divorced parents. I grew up with parents who were married for 45 years when my father died. I didn't know how to co-parent a child with someone you weren't in a relationship.
You didn't have any modeling of that behavior. And I mean, and also you were 15. Oh my gosh.
Oh, and not even a real bright 15, like I was 15, but I was not even that mature for my age. Like I was a child in every sense of the word. And
when you had your son, did you end up living at home still then for a period of time?
I did, until I graduated from high school. So I was there for about 2 years. And then later on in my early 20s, I had to move back for a period of time. But I moved out the second that I could. I mean, I think it was one of those things where I was so embarrassed and I felt so much shame and guilt living there that I just wanted to get away from it. And that maybe wasn't the best thing to do, because they were loving and they wanted to help me, but I didn't want them to help me. I didn't want them to have to help me. And I still had 2 little sisters. My youngest sister was only 11 when my son was born. So they were still raising, and my middle sister is special needs. So they still had their hands full with their other 2 children. And now I brought this other baby into the world. And it was a lot.
It's so interesting for me to hear this, Leslie, because one of my sisters, so my mom and dad had 4 girls and a boy, and then they had a foster child that never left, and me, and I was adopted. And the youngest girl before me, so like big, I think she's 14 years older than me or something. So there's the 4 girls, and then there's the brother, and then Harold, he's like 7 years older than me. Anyway, and then Nettie, a couple years older. Anyway, so she's 13 or 14 years older than me. So it's interesting. She was 17, was pregnant, waited forever to tell my parents that she was pregnant. And it was like the 70s, and those like remember there was a little Empire tops where you'd have and then you'd have a little flowy top, right? So they were all watching TV. This is a story, and it's interesting because it's a story that my family talks about and laughs about and thinks is really cute, right? So everybody's watching TV, and then my dad gets up to go to the bathroom during a commercial break. My sister takes it. She's like, Mom, I'm pregnant. Right? And then Mom's holding her, and they're both crying. But it's kind of, she's like, no matter what, this is going to be fine. My dad comes back from the bathroom. He's like, what now? Because he lived in a house with his wife and 4 girls and 2, there's always something going on, right? There's always some kind of drama. And that's the first thing Dad says, like, it's going to be fine. Like, you know what? Okay. And it's just sad that, because she didn't have shame about it. Like, she had tons of shame because she didn't tell them. But then once it was out, once she told her quote unquote like dirty secret, and what was also fascinating is that apparently the story is so she had her child, I think, in end of October, and this was beginning of September or something. Her pregnancy just went boom. She was really pregnant, but literally like within a weekend, she went from not showing to this ginormous person, right? Like just on the belly, right? Anyway, so I asked you that question about the reluctant teen mom situation because, it's so interesting how, the stuff that we carry, in decisions we make, and the fact that you're still, carrying that and processing it.
Oh yeah. And writing my book was extremely therapeutic, but it was so hard and still hard. It's like I said, it's still hard talking about it. And I catch myself now. I was recently at a club and I was talking to people, and you'd think I would be like, yeah, I just published this book. And I didn't do that, right? I'm sort of like talking to the person next to me and they're like, why didn't you tell everybody? And then we start talking about the title and I'm like, because I don't want all these people that I don't know to know that I was a teen mom, right? I'm still carrying that around, even
And how
though
old are
I
you?
turned it into something positive and I wrote a book about it, and that should be so joyous. And I'm still just like,
Yeah. How old are you now, Leslie?
44.
44. Yeah. And so, oh, yeah. Yeah. So interesting. With Brene Brown, she talks so much about her work on shame. Have you ever read any Brene Brown stuff?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Love it.
she always talks about when she's on a flight or something, say, so you're a writer? Yeah, I'm a writer. What do you write about? Shame? People are like, oh, we won't talk
Yeah.
about that.
But it's so, I mean, even it's still hard.
Yeah.
It's still hard.
Yeah.
And I'm, big on therapy. I'm a coach. I'm an avid reader, and I read nonfiction and I read psychology and I read everything to try to become better.
Yeah.
And I'm still feel like I have made it so much further than most people who have kids in high school.
I mean,
But,
yeah. I mean, the fact that you're working on your Ph.D., that you've got 2 degrees under your belt, you've got a published book, you've got a thriving coaching practice. And it's so interesting. Some of our greatest, and like you're really able to be really helping people, because you're not sitting there on some kind of an ivory tower situation looking down at people because everything's going along swimming, like that really hard learning, that hard lessons, and that shame and that, and the guilt that you've had is something that you're able to say to your clients, I know, like
yeah,
you do, and on a deep level, and people get that. They get that authentic, stuff,
they
right?
do. And one of the things I figured out about myself a really long time ago was that if I judge you for something, I don't know how the universe works this way, but if I judge you for something, it will happen to me. Like
Oh yeah.
something will happen that I will find myself in the exact same situation. And so luckily I figured that out a long time ago. And I tell everybody, I'm like, I will not judge you. Like, you're my client. If you're getting divorced and you tell me that you cheated on your spouse 27 times, we'll deal with that. It will not come from, I will not shame you for it. We'll say, okay, why? What were you looking for in that? How can we choose to have relationships that you don't do that to in the future? We try to talk about it, but I go out of my way. I do not judge people. I do not shame people. We are all humans and we are all making mistakes over and over again all the time.
Yeah.
And not talking about the mistakes doesn't mean that they weren't there.
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
that you're any better than anyone else, right?
Yeah,
And there's
exactly.
millions of women who did the same thing I did. And well, first of all, even more so, who had sex and didn't get pregnant. There's women who had abortions. There's women who went up for adoption. But the only people who really carry the stigma for teen parenting are the ones who actually had the baby, right? And so that I say that all the time. I'm like, I'm not really any different than anyone else. I just sort of got caught.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
That's all
exactly.
it is. And that's unfortunate for me. But, I still just really try to talk to my clients and say, there's no shame in any of it. You just have to be the kind of person who wants to learn why you do these things and decide if you want to stop.
And can you think of a case that you've had, Leslie, where, like as we're thinking about this, like how that direct experience that you had has directly affected your client?
I'm dealing with, my divorce was very messy. I moved on very quickly and that did not go over well. And so our whole divorce was rage and anger and jealousy and all of those things. And so I did have a client recently, and her divorce is very similar. And so it helped me to tell her, I'm like, look, I know, for example, he's going to text you and he's going to say these terrible things. And it is going to feel so good when he screws up, right? To be able to say, oh, well, you did this, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, but I cannot stress this enough. Don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, text me the haha and put it in your back pocket, because tearing him down more and more before you end up in front of a judge or mediation does not help who you want to be at the end of this.
Yeah,
it will feel awesome for like 5 seconds. It will feel so good. I'm like, but in the long run, it's not the right thing to do. Like you need to carry yourself in a way that you're going to be proud of at the end. And we need to stick to that. And so I don't know that I would have had that kind of insight had I not been through the same thing and seen the other side of it.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. I have some clients who answer, they answer all of their ex's emails by sending it to another friend to vet first, you know? And one person I know, like she just gets so triggered by, because the guy's very abusive, that she just like gets, her friends will say, oh, you've got to respond because your child has a dentist appointment, and her like good friend, right, reads the missives, right, and just says, this is what you need to respond to.
I mean, I agree with that. So I tell my clients, please send me your emails and correspondence and we'll go over them together before you send them. And if you don't have a divorce coach, I mean, that did help me in the past. And even when we're dealing with things like that, like that's what's great about being part of a team, right? Or you can say, hey, can you read this and just tell me what I need to know? You know?
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
need to know that they called me a shitty mom or how horrible I am at being a person. And also I look ugly and I don't need to hear all of that. Like, but if you just want to tell me that they're going to pick up my son at 4:00 on Friday and that's all I need to know from this email, perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
It is. The communication is so important and it is so triggering. I'm so glad that you said that. And it is important to find out ways to deal with it because you can't ignore it.
Yes. Yeah. No kidding. Yeah. No kidding. Before we sign off, any piece of wisdom, Leslie, if you said, okay, you're going through a separation, someone who's like, thinking about hiring a divorce coach, what would your piece of wisdom for them be?
Some of the advice that I give early on is when you're communicating with your ex, it will begin to feel like it's all negative or all very strategic, meaning it's about the kids. It's 4:00, it's 5:00, it's, logistics. And I always tell them, I was like, I know it's difficult, but make sure you throw something nice in there every now and then. Like Sam came home from school and I saw he got an A on that test that he took while he was at your house. I don't know what you did to help him study, but that was awesome.
Beautiful.
You don't have to say you're an awesome parent. You don't have to say anything, but it is really important that you try to build a positive relationship, and just starting with something small, it really, like something small like that goes a really long way.
Yes, it really does. Bill Eddy from the High Conflict Institute, he's written material about the BIF formula: brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And I often coach my clients to do that. And I used it in my own separation. Relentlessly, right? Hi, hope you're having a great afternoon. Just wanted to advise you.
Yeah.
But
yeah, you can make whatever face you want while you're doing it, right?
But actually, I have to say that, my divorce was really bumpy. I'm not even formally divorced yet, but we have a separation agreement, but that's all I care about at the moment. But it was very, very bumpy for the 6 months until we got the signed agreement. And then bumpy after that. But now it's like we're, almost we're friends. Yeah, like when he painted me a beautiful painting for my birthday. So yeah, it's kind of
Well, my youngest son's husband and I have been it's been bumpy. And he recently, he's 20, he's a boy, so, not that smart. And he got a speeding ticket and we were kind of dealing with the fallback from that. And his dad and I had to get on the phone and we had to talk. And, we haven't had to do that in a while. He's older. And we had what I was like, wow, that was a productive conversation. We actually did what we needed to. And it's sad that he's 20, but it was one of the first times I remember it being so just nice, right? And I said that to my husband. I was like, oh my God, I talked to his dad today. And, we had this like productive, and he was like, tell him. And I was like, yeah, you're right. So I tried to. I say, hey, look, that was really helpful, our conversation. Like, thank you for taking time out of your day to talk to me. And, it's nice feeling like, we're both there for him. And, just these small things. And obviously, even as a coach, I have to be reminded of that. But it helps. It really does help.
Totally.
And it makes you feel better to acknowledge it also. There's
life is long. Now, Leslie, where do people find you? Okay, obviously I'll put this in the show notes, but where will people find you if they want to reach out? And
Leslie Hope Coaching, and my book is Amazon, Barnes and Noble, everywhere you can get books online. Not Mary, Not Row. And it is a story. It is part memoir, but it's about writing your own story and rewriting the rules.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, and I'll make sure that that's linked up in the show notes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me. Great, fascinating story and really fascinating transformation. I love it.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Yeah, it really has.
So if you like what you see here, hit the like button, subscribe so you can be kept apprised of all my new content as soon as it's released. And if you want to know more, go to thebetterdivorceproject.com. That's thebetterdivorceproject.com. You'll find tons of treasures on that site, including the ability to sign up for the Better Divorce Project newsletter, where you will find helpful tips, strategies for helping you through your separation and divorce.